So the other day I made a video about how to add non-Steam applications to your Steam Deck, and the game that I used for an example for that was Bloodborne PSX. Now I chose that for a few different reasons. One, it's just a super rad game. Two, I actually had a few people specifically request that that be used in a video. But then finally, the other reason that I wanted to do it was because I have started to develop a bit of a fondness for the PS1 era graphics. Now here's the thing, I didn't come into the PlayStation 1 until very late in its life cycle. I grew up a complete Nintendo kid, so it took a lot to sway me over to the world of Sony to really get a feel for those graphics and what that system had to offer. But man, once I got there, I had a really great time with games that were as enthralling as, say, Metal Gear Solid, to ones that were simpler fare but still a whole lot of fun, like Pong. However, as fondly as I look back at those early days of 3D gaming, honestly, a lot of that is rooted in nostalgia. Because if I'm being honest, a lot of the games don't really hold up that well today, at least visually, and a lot of them do look kind of ugly. However, I only mean this from a technical perspective because artistically, there were some absolute stunners from that system. And because I don't think that era of gaming gets nearly as much appreciation as it deserves, certainly not as much as, say, the 16-bit era does, today what I wanted to do is make a video about games that look like they should have come from the PS1 era, but in fact are modern offerings that you can play on the Steam Deck that are just a lot of fun in their own right. So all that being said, I want to go ahead and kick this list off with a game that many of you recommended, and that is Signalis. I feel like I'd heard this name kicked around even before I saw it in the comments here, but for whatever reason I never took the initiative to investigate it further, and I can say confidently now that that was a huge mistake, because this game is completely intriguing and it utilizes that PS1 aesthetic to tremendous effect. Released back in October, Signalis takes place after the Penrose 512 scout shuttle crash lands on an unknown planet. In this world, there are androids called Replikas that are made with copied human neural implants that perform labor tasks and combat duties. And each replica has a human commander called a Gestalt that gives them direction. After you awaken, you'll find your partner Ariana is missing, and that your ship is clearly in disrepair, and that's where the adventure kicks off. From there, you'll quickly discover in a world with tons of subjugated replicas running around that this can definitely cause some problems. What follows is an absolutely brilliant blend of sci-fi survival horror and puzzle solving that sucks you in immediately. Resources are scarce and you'll find a variety of obstacles to contend with, whether that's cracking a wall safe, picking locks, or piecing together information from various notes, memos, and manuals that you'll find scattered throughout the environments. Not to mention there are plenty of threats lurking around to keep you weighing the immediate risks of outmaneuvering your attacker versus the longer term risk of expending ammo that you might need to deal with a greater foe later on. What's most striking here isn't just that it employs PS1 era visuals to tell the story, but it does so with some fresh new tricks that really bring the aesthetic to life. I think the best way I can describe it is it feels like the sort of game Stanley Kubrick might have made if he had made games. The visuals ping-pong between pixel art and cutscenes to full-on 3D cutscenes that are just framed in really compelling ways, and it quickly became clear to me that my hunger to see more of these sequences was pushing me forward as much as the gameplay. And the environments can feel truly terrifying, making great use of light and shadow, and it legitimately scared me at a few key points. Plus, it doesn't hurt that they offer some clear nods to Resident Evil and Silent Hill, whether that's the harrowing shift to first person in certain sequences, the map and inventory systems, or the soft red glow of an all too familiar grid-like save point. I just can't say enough good about this game, and if you're at all a fan of survival horror's earliest entries, Signalis feels like a total love letter to that era. Steam Deck performance is rock solid so far, keeping a steady 60 FPS while providing 4 to 5 hours of battery life if you're looking to cuddle up with some sci-fi terror before bedtime. Next up, stepping away almost entirely from anything you would consider creepy, is a colorful 3D platformer called Tori 3D. So Tori 3D is an odd one because I actually discovered it on the Haunted PS1 Demo Disc 2021 right after I ran across it on the Steam Marketplace. Now I bought the Steam version as well, but it was neat that I could at least play a demo of it from the Haunted PS1 Demo Disc and get a taste of what it had to offer. But at its core, it's a simple platformer with retina-searingly late 90s visuals. There are 9 levels total and a couple of secret characters to unlock as well. The action is smooth and mostly straightforward as you run and double jump your way through its colorful levels, collecting stars. Visually, it feels like you're playing an early 3D Sonic game or something, but there's definitely some Nintendo flavor sprinkled in here as well. And the music for each stage is perfectly listenable without being annoying, which is pretty important if you're going to be hearing it over and over on your quest to finish with a better and better time. All that while hopefully collecting all of the stars in each level along the way. Thankfully, even though Tori 3D is as straightforward as it gets mechanically, it really nails the basics here. Running, jumping, double jumping, and all of the mid-air control that you have really feels pretty solid so far. Performance-wise, you'll get a solid 60 FPS and about 6 hours of battery life, give or take, but considering you're likely to beat it in an hour or less depending on your skill level, the 99-cent price point feels perfectly appropriate here. Still, if you're looking to have some fun in a poppy platformer that's dripping with a sort of 90s vaporwave style, there are way worse ways that you could spend $1 on Steam. Next up, moving into first-person shooter territory, is another budget title, and one that completely nails the mechanics of its genre, and that is Chop Goblins. So Chop Goblins wastes exactly no time in setting up its premise. It's 1984, and cheese-loving goblins have broken out of a wooden chest in the basement of your local museum. Hell-bent on wreaking havoc on the world for their imprisonment, it's your job to stop them, and you're pretty much off to the races. First off, I love everything about this schlocky setup, but I was not expecting the controls here to be so tight. Now, we're not talking like Quake levels of polish here in the movement department, but it's perfectly precise, and shooting hordes of annoying goblins is a whole lot of fun. Even if it only starts you off with a knife and a flintlock pistol that takes forever to reload. But it doesn't take long for new options to open up, like an auto shotgun, stake shooter, and even a magical wand at one point. Now, there are only a handful of levels as a budget title, but I have to say, budget titles don't normally feel this well put together. And don't let the low poly visuals fool you, because movement feels as precise and satisfying as just about any other boomer shooter that I've played in the past couple of years. I just wish there were like 100 levels of annoying, screaming, though charming little goblins to blast away at. The pacing feels really good here too, with the threat of the goblin horde ramping up and then receding at just the right moments to give you a breather and snatch up any health and ammo to keep pushing on. All of this is set to some distinctly 80s synth tunes, and the whole vibe of Chop Goblins just feels campy and right in a Gremlins 2 sort of way, I guess. It's just a bunch of playful, dumb, nonsensical fun, and sometimes that is exactly what a game needs to be. And for $5, I feel like I've already gotten my money's worth out of it. Next up, headed back to platforming and also at a $4.99 price point, is Lunistis, which I am fairly certain I'm pronouncing correctly, could be wrong. Lunistis is a 3D platformer, but it has a little bit more meat on its bones than Tori 3D. For starters, you'll play as Hannah, an anthropomorphized Tanuki, and in addition to running and double jumping, you will also get a spinning attack to take out the enemies that pepper the dreamlike stages of Lunistis. Granted, the enemies here don't really feel that threatening, more like brief impediments, but still, it's nice that it adds a bit more nuance here, and the spin attack can be used to glide a little bit and help correct errant jumps, which I was making constantly. That's because in addition to looking like an old school game, it definitely has the difficulty of some early era platformers. However, every time I missed a jump and went plummeting to my demise, I knew it was because I had made a mistake and not because the controls were failing me or because the camera was working against my progress. It all feels really tight and responsive, and levels are pseudo-linear in that you can beeline your way to the end of each stage, but just off the path in front of you, there are always a few detours you can take if you really want to push your platforming skills a little harder. Along the way, you'll snatch up paper cranes as collectibles, and do your best to finish each new area with a decent time. Visually, it nails the cutesy platformer look from the era, and as an added bonus, they did throw in some graphical options to enable a CRT filter and drop the frame rate down to 20 if you want it to feel more retro than it already is. I've only played through the first couple of stages so far, but apparently you can beat this one in around 3 hours. And you know, I might just go for it considering it has a very pleasant soundtrack and a tough but fair approach to platforming that is definitely appealing to me. And finally, the last entry on this list is really more of an experience than a game, but it is totally free and you can beat it in 4 minutes, so assuming you've got 4 minutes to kill, I would recommend checking out Lure. Lure is a short story about an old man who asks you to go fishing for him at a nearby shrine. I won't say anything more than that, but I really love short experiences like this, particularly ones that can give off an unsettling atmosphere with such a limited approach to visuals. All I can say is it's very effective at fulfilling what it sets out to do in 4 minutes, and it's best to go in as blind as possible on this one. And that's it for this one, mostly because it was really hard to make this video. Not because it was hard to get games or to actually capture the footage, but it was really hard to find PS1 style games that weren't either first-person shooters or survival horror games. Now, I have nothing against those, I love both of those genres to death, but at the same time, I wish I could find more games with like that low poly aesthetic that were not quite so dark in tone all the time. I mean, at least I got Tori 3D on here, I guess, and Lunistis, which again, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing correctly, is also a happier, more upbeat game, but yeah, I feel like I got kind of locked in here, so if you have any suggestions for games that look like they came from the PS1 era that I just completely overlooked, or maybe I covered it in a previous video and I chose not to, showcase it here because I didn't want to just repeat myself endlessly, please do let me know in the comments below because I really do like this visual style and I don't think that it gets enough play compared to the 16-bit era. But yeah, again, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch these videos. I really, really appreciate it. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.